Early morning. South of Robotyne, Zaporizhia Oblast. A Russian armored column, 14 vehicles, BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicles and T-72B3 tanks, pushes north along a rutted dirt track through dry summer fields. The tree line is thin, the sky is pale. The crossroads ahead is less than 800 meters away. Ukraine's drone team has been watching this axis for 72 hours. A single Ukrainian reconnaissance drone, a modified Mavic 3 with a thermal lens, orbited at 400 meters when the column first formed up. The feed reached a tablet screen in a concealed position 3 kilometers west. The operator counted the vehicles one by one. 14. Same composition as Monday. Same axis. Same time window, just after first light, when Russian commanders apparently believed morning haze gave them cover. It does not. Open-source trackers following this sector have noted a pattern that Ukrainian artillery planners confirmed weeks ago. Russian mechanized units in this stretch of southern Zaporizhia keep returning to the same approach vectors, rotating through a limited set of pre-planned routes. The crossroads south of Robotyne, where a track from the east meets the main unpaved road running north, has been hit twice in the same week. Both times, Russian columns reached it. Both times, Ukrainian forces offered only light harassment fire. Enough to sting, not enough to stop. The third wave is the point. Here is what makes this crossroads expensive for Russia, and why Ukrainian planners chose it deliberately. It sits in a natural depression, flanked by shallow berms on two sides, with a stand of burned scrub oak on the northern edge. Vehicles entering the junction lose lateral dispersal options. The track from the east forces column formation for roughly 200 meters on approach. There is no covered route around it. Russian commanders knew this. They ordered the assault anyway, twice. The third order came because the first two appeared to succeed. That appearance was manufactured. A $500 FPV drone is about to engage a column, representing several $1 million in Russian armored investment. Open-source analysts tracking this sector say it happens dozens of times across the front every single day. But the engagement south of Robotyne is not routine. What the drone team does next is the product of 72 hours of deliberate patience, and a Russian operational rhythm so predictable it became its own liability. Here is how it works. Ukrainian forward observers began mapping the column's behavior 3 days before this morning. The first assault was monitored in full by a reconnaissance element in a tree line to the west. The column moved in formation, crossed the junction, drew a short burst of 82mm mortar fire, 3 rounds, no direct hits, and pulled back. Standard contact. Standard withdrawal. The Russian after-action would have read, junction reached, light resistance, no significant losses, route viable. The second assault followed within 24 hours. Ukraine's response was nearly identical. A small drone filmed the crossing. 2 artillery rounds landed in the fields to the south. Deliberate misses, close enough to register as real, not close enough to destroy the lead vehicle. The column crossed again, pulled back again. Russian pattern assessment. Contested but passable. Recommend follow-up with reinforced element. The reinforced element is now 14 vehicles. What the Russian commanders did not account for, what OSINT-confirmed footage of similar engagements across the front suggests, is a recurring failure in Russian tactical planning, is that Ukrainian forces were not missing. They were measuring. Each of the first 2 crossings gave Ukrainian artillery observers precise range data. The fire control solution was refined with each pass. By the time the third column formed up, the 155mm howitzer battery assigned to this sector had firing data accurate to within 30 meters. The crossroads is a pre-registered target, has been for 48 hours. Think about what that means operationally. Every vehicle that enters that junction does so inside a box Ukrainian artillery has already solved. The guns don't need to adjust. They don't need a spotter call. The coordinates are loaded, the charge is set, the crews are waiting. There is one complication that nearly unravels the plan. As the column begins its final approach, still 600 meters from the junction, a Russian electronic warfare system activates on a frequency that partially disrupts the lead FPV team's control signal. The first operator's drone drops to a hover, locked in signal degradation. For 11 seconds, the lead FPV sits stationary at low altitude, exposed, burning battery. If the Russian EW operator sweeps wider, the entire drone element could be disrupted before the column enters the kill zone. The Ukrainian team had anticipated this. 2 FPV operators are assigned to this engagement. The second is running a frequency-hopped system, modified firmware that shifts bands every few seconds, harder to lock. That drone is already airborne, already tracking. The first operator regains partial control, enough to maneuver, not enough to execute the primary run. The second operator takes the lead. The column continues forward. The lead BMP-2 is now 400 meters from the junction. Its commander, in footage later reviewed by open-source analysts, does not appear to take evasive action. The vehicle moves at a consistent speed, roughly 22 kilometers per hour on the rutted track, in column formation, with about 40 meters between vehicles. Standard road march spacing, not combat dispersal. There is a question worth sitting with here. At what point does a Russian column commander look at a route assaulted twice in 3 days and decide that the lack of serious resistance means the route is safe, rather than a trap? The answer, repeated across dozens of documented engagements on multiple sectors of this front, appears to be consistently. Ukrainian forces have exploited this assumption repeatedly. The pattern: allow initial crossings, collect data, spring the ambush on the reinforced follow-up, appears in OSINT analysis of engagements near Avdiivka, near Vuhledar, and now here, south of Robotyne. What's most surprising about this engagement isn't the technology Ukraine deploys. It's how thoroughly Russian tactical culture, in this phase of the war, has failed to adapt to the evidence its own commanders are generating. Put yourself in the position of the column commander this morning. You have after-action reports from 2 prior crossings. Both show light resistance. Both show withdrawal. You have 14 vehicles, a meaningful force commitment. You have orders to take and hold the junction. The rational conclusion, given those inputs, is that the route is viable. The flaw in that logic is that you are not the one with 72 hours of observational data. You are not the one who watched the first 2 columns and chose to let them through. The Ukrainian planners are. The lead BMP-2 enters the junction at 0614 local time. The second vehicle is 30 meters behind it. The third is still on the approach track, not yet inside the prepared fire zone. The first FPV drone, the one degraded by Russian EW, closes from the northwest at roughly 130 kilometers per hour. The warhead is a PG-7 rocket grenade, standard RPG munition, repurposed for FPV delivery. Shaped charge, effective against light armor. The BMP-2 is light armor. The impact hits the rear deck, above the engine compartment. The BMP-2 does not explode immediately. It lurches forward, loses power, and stops in the center of the junction, blocking the primary axis. Secondary fires begin within seconds. The vehicle is not destroyed outright, but it is mission killed. And it is now an obstacle sitting in the exact center of the pre-registered target grid. The second vehicle breaks. The column concertinas, vehicles closing the gap as the lead stops. The spacing that was 40 meters collapses to 15, then 10, as drivers react to the sudden halt. This is the moment Ukrainian artillery has been building toward for 3 days. Here is the part that seems counterintuitive. Ukraine used almost no firepower in the first 2 engagements. 3 mortar rounds, 2 artillery misses, restraint, while Russian forces held ground. But the calculation is different when you understand what Ukrainian forces were buying with that restraint. They were buying the reinforced column. 14 vehicles in a single kill zone instead of 3 or 4 on a dispersed approach. The patience cost almost nothing. The return is arriving right now. 2 155mm rounds, Western supplied. OSINT suggests the battery in this sector has received M795 projectiles, standard NATO 155mm high explosive, impact the junction within 4 seconds of each other. The first round lands 12 meters north of the stalled BMP-2. The second lands in the track to the east, directly in the path of the third vehicle in the column. Open-source footage reviewed in the days following shows the results in thermal and optical imagery. The third vehicle, a T-72B3, takes direct fragmentation across its left track assembly. Track separation. The tank is immobile inside the approach corridor, now blocking the vehicles behind it from advancing or reversing cleanly. The column is stopped. Front blocked by a burning BMP. Rear approach blocked by a mission-killed tank. The 9 vehicles in between are stationary, inside a pre-registered fire zone with no covered egress. Ukraine's general staff, in a statement attributed to this sector's operations, would later note that subsequent fire missions were conducted against the concentrated formation. Oryx, the open-source equipment loss tracker, confirmed a minimum of 7 armored vehicles destroyed or damaged in the engagement, based on geolocated imagery, a figure analysts consider a floor, not a ceiling, given that some wreckage locations had not yet been confirmed at time of publication. The second FPV operator is already running the second drone. The target is a BMP-2 fourth in the column, which has begun attempting a three-point turn on the narrow track, a maneuver that briefly exposes its thinner side armor. The drone closes. The impact is center mass on the vehicle's left side. The vehicle stops turning. There are intercepted radio transmissions from this engagement, not attributable to named individuals, and not verified as to specific content, but consistent with patterns documented in dozens of similar engagements. Ukrainian electronic intelligence units monitoring the tactical frequency in this sector report high-volume, overlapping transmissions in the minutes following the first artillery impacts. The character of the traffic, rapid, short transmissions, multiple simultaneous speakers, is consistent with what analysts describe as formation disruption communication, commanders and drivers trying to coordinate withdrawal with no pre-planned exit route and no cover. There is no pre-planned exit route. The track from the east, the approach corridor, is blocked by the T-72B3. The fields on either side of the junction are soft ground in the summer heat, not firm enough for tracked vehicles to move at speed without bogging. Two vehicles attempt to leave the track and immediately slow to a crawl in the soft soil. A third Mavic 3, dispatched by a second Ukrainian reconnaissance element now repositioning east of the junction, tracks both vehicles as they push into the field. The artillery battery is still active. It fires again. Going back through the documented pattern of Russian mechanized losses in this sector over recent weeks, one figure in the compiled OSINT keeps standing out. The ratio of vehicles lost per engagement is significantly higher in cases where Russian forces assault the same axis multiple times in a short window. This is not a coincidence. Ukrainian planners appear to be deliberately allowing the first crossing to establish Russian confidence in a route, then maximizing destruction on follow-up assaults. It is a systematic approach, not improvised desperation, but a developed doctrine for force multiplication using patience as a weapon. Here is the take that will get some pushback. Russian tactical command in this sector, and in analogous sectors across the front, is not simply making errors of individual judgment. The pattern of repeated assaults on confirmed contact routes, documented near Avdiivka, Vuhledar, and the Kupiansk axis, suggests a structural failure in how Russian units communicate battlefield learning upward and translate it into adjusted orders downward. Individual Russian company commanders, based on intercepted communications and battlefield behavior, often appear to understand that a route is dangerous. The orders to assault it anyway appear to come from higher. What's on Russian tactical command is not individual courage or cowardice. It's a feedback loop that doesn't work. Losses don't reliably produce route changes. That is an institutional failure, not a field one. Is this what happens when a military built for top-down command tries to fight an adaptive opponent? Comment below we read the answers. If you track the war through OSINT and open-source analysis, you already recognize this pattern. It's in the data, in the Oryx tallies, in the general staff reports. Subscribe. We break down a new frontline engagement every week, and every week the pattern evolves. Back to the field south of Robotyne. One vehicle in the column does not follow the main formation into the junction. The 12th vehicle, a BMP-2 that, based on its position late in the column, had not yet fully committed to the approach track when the first artillery rounds impacted, reversed immediately, before the track became blocked, and pushed back along the approach route at speed. It survived. Why it was spared is worth explaining, because it was not an accident. Ukrainian drone operators, reviewing the situation in the immediate aftermath of the first strikes, made a deliberate decision not to chase the retreating vehicle with a second FPV. The reasoning, consistent with Ukrainian drone doctrine as described by Ukrainian military commentators in public statements, is resource conservation. An FPV expended on a retreating vehicle is an FPV not available for the next engagement. The escaping vehicle carried, almost certainly, a crew that now had direct observational data on the ambush methodology. That information would go up the chain. And here is the Ukrainian calculation. It doesn't matter, because the next column will still be ordered to take the same junction, and Ukraine will have time to reset. The engagement south of Robotyne does not end with a clean Ukrainian victory, in the sense of zero cost. One FPV drone, the unit partially degraded by Russian EW, was lost on its final run, apparent loss of control in the last 50 meters before impact, the drone striking short of its target. One Ukrainian artillery position, based on counter-battery radar track, received 2 Russian 152mm rounds in response to its fire mission. Ukrainian sources report no casualties, and the position relocated before a follow-up mission could land. But the materiel risk is real. Counter-battery fire is a genuine constraint on Ukrainian artillery operations, and Russian counter-battery capability, while diminished from its peak by ammunition supply pressures, remains active. The cost asymmetry, though, is stark. Ukraine's general staff attributes the engagement's outcome to combined arms coordination, reconnaissance drone queuing, pre-registered artillery, FPV employment, and EW countermeasures working in sequence. Western analysts reviewing the documented pattern of similar engagements estimate the total Ukrainian expenditure in materiel for this type of operation: 2 FPV drones at roughly $500 each, several 155mm rounds at estimated costs ranging from $2,000 to $800 per round depending on variant, reconnaissance drone flight hours, comes to somewhere between $15,000 and $30,000 per engagement. Oryx's running tally of Russian armored vehicle losses, based solely on visually confirmed and geolocated imagery, has tracked over 3,000 Russian tanks destroyed, damaged, or captured since the full-scale invasion. The cumulative replacement cost, at current export prices for Russian armor, runs into the tens of billions of dollars. The vehicles lost south of Robotyne this morning, minimum 7 confirmed, a figure likely to rise as imagery is analyzed, represent somewhere between $20 and $40 million in armored hardware at export price estimates, against a Ukrainian expenditure in the tens of thousands. This is not a single engagement story. It is a rate problem. And the rate, according to Western analysts tracking equipment flows on both sides, is not sustainable on the Russian side at current attrition levels. If you track this war seriously, through Oryx, through the General Staff dailies, through OSINT researchers on open platforms, you already see what the pattern means. Russian armored capability is not unlimited. The replacement pipeline exists, but it is drawing from Soviet-era storage stocks of declining quality, with T-62s and even older platforms appearing on the front alongside modernized T-90Ms. The modernized platforms are being destroyed faster than they can be replaced. The older platforms are being destroyed and are not worth replacing. What you are watching, engagement by engagement, is a force structure degrading in real time. South of Robotyne, the dry summer fields are quiet again by mid-morning. The burning vehicles will be identifiable on satellite imagery within hours. The crossroads, ordered assaulted 3 times in a week, is now a debris field. Oryx analysts will geolocate the wreckage. The General Staff will cite the engagement in its daily bulletin. OSINT researchers will map the positions. And somewhere in the Russian tactical chain for this sector, an order is already being drafted for the next approach. Here is what the engagement south of Robotyne actually demonstrates about where this phase of the war is heading. The most expensive Russian military asset on the modern Ukrainian battlefield is not the tank, it is predictability. Every time a Russian column repeats an approach vector, repeats a timing window, repeats a formation structure, it is donating data to the Ukrainian fire control system. The FPV drone is the tool, the pre-registered grid is the method, but the 72 hours of patience, the decision to let the first 2 columns through, is the strategy, and it costs almost nothing. The crossroads south of Robotyne will be contested again. The ground there has changed hands multiple times across the arc of this war, and the current front line in this sector reflects months of attritional pressure in both directions. What this engagement changes is not the line on the map, it is the inventory. 14 vehicles entered this axis. 7 or more will not leave it as functioning systems. The crews are unaccounted for in open-source reporting. Ukrainian sources decline to give casualty figures for individual engagements, and Russian sources are silent on the matter, as they are on most loss events of this type. What does not change? The order to take the junction will come again. The question worth thinking through carefully is whether the Russian institutional structure that produced this outcome has any mechanism to actually learn from it, or whether the same approach vector, the same column formation, the same morning timing window will appear on a Ukrainian reconnaissance drone's feed in the days ahead. Drop a comment. Do you think Russian armored tactics in this sector adapt in the next 30 days, or does the pattern hold? We will come back to this front. This is how the war is being fought right now, not in sweeping armored breakthroughs, but in crossroads pre-registered with artillery, in drone teams running frequency-hopped signals against Russian EW, in the deliberate patience of letting a column pass twice before closing the trap on the third. The technology is documented. The outcomes are verified. The pattern is not a coincidence. It is a doctrine, and it is working.